How did this SaaS company turn $12,000 into $1.1 million in pipeline? LinkedIn influencer marketing. So Jess Cook, the head of marketing at Vector, recently shared that she sponsored 7 LinkedIn creators to publish just 3 posts each on LinkedIn. And those combined posts generated $1.1 million in pipeline. So how can you duplicate these results? So the first step is selecting the creators for the campaign. Now, I would say that total engagement per post and sometimes follower count are pretty common metrics that a lot of influencer marketers use when they're evaluating creators. But this case study highlights that audience match is significantly more important than audience size. Jess said that she selected 7 influencers. 3 of them were customers and 4 of them were ICP thought leaders. Now, I did some research and I found 6 of these 7 influencers. And they really did perfectly match Vector's ICP. 3 of them were demand gen consultants or agency owners, and 3 of them run demand gen in-house or are a marketing executive at a brand. But I was surprised to learn just how niche these influencers' audiences actually were. So Jess mentioned that they had an average follower count of just 13,000. And the 6 of the 7 creators that I found also had a pretty modest average engagement of just about 111 per post. So that's average likes, comments, and reposts combined. And when I looked at the average engagement on the 17 sponsored posts, the average post earned about 50 likes, 13 comments, and just 1 repost. Now, these stats prove that audience match really is significantly more important than audience size. I also want to mention that there's a difference between niche creators and credible niche creators who actually have curated an audience that matches your ICP. And you can tell the difference between these two just by looking at the comments section. If an influencer is a credible niche creator, I would say that usually about 70% of the comments are going to be from the ICP. The comments themselves are also usually very insightful observations of these other people sharing their own experience, or maybe even asking the influencer follow-up question. Here's an example of the comments section from one of Vector's sponsored posts, and you can see that it really checks all of these boxes. I even noticed influencer Justin Rowe jumping in the comments section. So now that you know what to look for in a creator, how do you actually find great creators to partner with? Start by reviewing your current customer list. Do any of them have any audience on LinkedIn or maybe even X? And then after exhausting your current customer list, look at the thought leaders in your space. And you want to see people that are maybe doing webinars, maybe they've done some keynote speeches at conferences, anything like that that shows that they're actually credible in your niche. But that process is pretty manual and laborious, so you could also just use Favicon. It's a lot faster. So maybe filter by a keyword like demand gen. Next, filter more granularly by industry and niche. So I chose sales and marketing as an industry, and you could even choose SaaS as a niche. You can also set the language to English or the country. So I chose the United States, and then adjust the LinkedIn filters. So like posts 5 times a month, has at least 2,000 followers, and has an average engagement on posts of maybe 30. And you'll see that Kaylee, one of the influencers that actually participated in Vector's program, is one of the first ones that popped up. So that's an easier way to quickly find creators. Once you have a list of creators, you can further check for audience match by using a nifty hack that I learned from Obey Durrani of Clay. So you can go to LinkedIn's search bar, type in a job title or function like demand gen, hit people on the left side, click all filters all the way down to the right, scroll down to followers of, enter the name of the creator that you're researching, and hopefully their followers are relevant. I actually used this hack when I was analyzing the creators involved in Vector's influencer campaign, and you could see that they really did perfectly fit the ICP. Next, you can check the comments section on some of their latest posts. So who, title-wise, is actually commenting on these posts? What's the conversation like? Are they actually seeking advice from this influencer? Or maybe otherwise indicating that they view this person as a credible source? And while I would say that this case study makes a pretty solid case for credible niche influencers with a really curated audience, and therefore suggests that engagement metrics are kind of overrated, I do want to point out one caveat. So Vector is a B2B product with a very limited ICP, demand gen marketers and marketing executives. So it makes sense that a post targeting relevant demand gen pain points would only resonate with a pretty small pool of people. because there really just aren't that many demand gen marketers in the world. So engagement should be pretty modest. But I would say that if you're like a prosumer company with a really broad audience and you rely on customer volume to grow, so maybe you have like a very low cost product and therefore you need a lot of customers to grow, I would say that total engagement per post is a more valuable metric. So for example, let's say that you have like a resume builder, maybe like Kick Resume. When the highest plan costs $23 a month, you really need a high volume of users to be able to grow this business. So in this case, Kick Resume has a much larger pool of prospects than, say, Vector. So I would say that total engagement per post is a more relevant metric for Kick Resume. Now, the exception to this rule is if you're exclusively purchasing content rights to use as ads from these creators. So as Will Taylor pointed out in the comments, this actually can be a really great option. But if you decide to go this route, just make sure that you're budgeting accordingly when you're negotiating influencer rates. Once you have a roster of relevant creators, you need to figure out what you're going to have them actually promote. Now, Jess shared that these were the campaign ideas that she chose. For month 1, they promoted a product launch. For month 2, they shared their take on a particular research study that Vector did. For month 3, they promoted the core product. I also found that these posts promoting the core product are actually really great market research, as Mason points out the key differences between Vector and its competitors' products. And you can also use these market research insights to actually improve your ad messaging and even your SEO efforts, because you can refine the messaging in your BOFU competitor comparison posts. Now, the third step is actually crafting the post. So after opening the conversation, Jess didn't just give these influencers some copy and tell them to go post it on LinkedIn. No. Instead, she had each influencer actually use the product. And that may seem like it's just a formality, but it's actually really critical to making the posts convert. By actually using the product first, influencers really understand the pain points that the product actually solves, and then they can provide proof in the form of mini case studies to actually support their claims. And it's this level of understanding of the pain points that the product solves, along with the proof, that probably makes the post convert so well. So for example, look at this post from partner Kaylee Edmondson. So Kaylee points out that there are a lot of tools that claim that they can de-anonymize your traffic, but a lot of real demand gen marketers, which is Vector's ICP, have already heard of this promise from other competitors, and they know that most products actually fall short on their promise. So Kaylee addresses this objection and then provides proof with a screenshot that Vector actually works a lot better and more effectively than its competitors. And one of the commenters even mentioned that they booked a demo from this post. Here's another example of a post from Mason Cosby. So he actually does a direct comparison of Vector versus some anonymous competitor and proves that Vector was actually a lot more effective than the competitor. But if he didn't have that experience, that case study, just claiming that Vector is better wouldn't have been a very compelling argument. Also, did you notice that Mason Cosby actually said that Vector is now the product that they're going to be using moving forward? So this means that Vector likely converted some of the influencers into customers. So by paying them to do a demo and talk about the product, they actually got a customer out of that influencer partnership. Now, of course, the obvious caveat here is that the product needs to actually deliver on the promise. Otherwise, influencer marketing, or really any marketing for that matter, isn't going to work. Now, step 4 is to invest in compounding relationships. So you'll see that Jess hired each of these influencers to do 3 sponsored posts with Vector. And if you're planning to do influencer marketing partnerships, you definitely want to give each creator like a 2 to 3 post pilot test. Given the unpredictability of LinkedIn's algorithm, a single post might not be a very accurate representation of that creator's true value. That post might flop, or it might significantly outperform the creator's standard performance. Also, Peter Conforey did an analysis of Adam Robinson's audience, and he found that the crossover audience from each post was only like 15%. So you may only be reaching a really small fraction of an influencer's audience with each post. So by doing multiple sponsored posts, you're actually reaching a higher percentage of their audience. In fact, this was a real comment on the 3rd sponsored post that Vector did with Kaylee Edmondson. So this person says, that awkward moment when you've never heard of Vector, we'll check it out. So even though Kaylee, along with the 6 other influencers, had already posted about Vector twice, this particular person had never heard of Vector. And also, most B2B buyers aren't going to make a purchase the first time that they hear about your brand. So increasing impressions and touch points with your brand is really useful in its own right. I also found this interesting stat from Tom Boston, who was actually an influencer who partnered with Storylane. And you can see here that each consecutive sponsored post that he did with them outperformed the previous one, at least from an impression standpoint. He claims that this is because he was able to better understand what resonated with the audience and then therefore improve the efficacy of each progressive post. So rather than just sponsoring creators for a single post, think about doing long-term partnerships. And if you really want to go the extra mile, you can actually host events for partners. I've also seen influencer marketers like AJ Eckstein send personalized gifts to these creators. Now, the last step is tracking conversions. In this particular case study, Jess mentioned that she didn't do any direct tracking. Instead, she set up alerts in their call recording software and then added a "How did you hear about us" field in the demo request form. And I actually have a separate post breaking down how other influencer marketers actually measure influencer marketing success. But I would say that the "How did you hear about us" field was definitely the most commonly mentioned method. The last step is scaling. So moving forward, Jess plans to scale these influencer partnerships by turning top performing posts into thought leadership ads and even offering sponsorship opportunities with an influencer tie-in. And while Jess may plan to hire influencers, she didn't state that specifically. And I mention this because adding more influencers isn't always the best method to scale. This is especially true if you have a very limited number of highly relevant niche creators. In those cases, you'll actually probably see a lower ROI by expanding to larger but maybe less relevant influencers. Instead, if you run out of highly relevant niche influencers, then consider trying, as Jess mentioned, promoting the top performing posts through thought leadership ads or just increasing the scope of existing partnerships. So that's how Vector generated $1.1 million in pipeline from a $12,000 investment. If you're planning to try this strategy and need a tool to easily find creators, then check out Favicon. And be sure to subscribe to learn more about LinkedIn and influencer marketing.